The world's youngest billionaire had flown on private jets for years, but today he chose a commercial flight. No one knew why. At just 29 years old, Ethan Brooks had built one of the largest technology companies in the world. To everyone else, he had everything: success, fame, billions of dollars. Yet deep inside, something was missing. As he settled into his first-class seat, passengers whispered and snapped discreet photos. Then, moments before the cabin door closed, an elderly man wearing worn clothes and carrying a faded military duffel bag slowly walked down the aisle. His beard was gray, his shoes were scuffed, his jacket had clearly seen better days. People looked away, some frowned, others quietly complained. Then the flight attendant stopped beside Ethan. "I'm so sorry for the inconvenience, sir," she said. "Due to an unexpected seating issue, this gentleman will be sitting beside you." The entire cabin fell silent. Everyone waited to see how the billionaire would react. Little did they know, this ordinary flight was about to change both of their lives forever. The elderly veteran slowly placed his faded duffel bag beneath the seat and settled into the chair beside Ethan.
Son.
The cabin remained unusually quiet. A few passengers exchanged uneasy glances. One businessman leaned toward a flight attendant and whispered, "Surely he doesn't belong in first class." Another passenger sighed loudly, making sure everyone could hear. The veteran lowered his eyes. He had heard those words before. Ethan noticed the silence and the pain behind the old man's tired expression. Without saying a word, he smiled. "Good afternoon," Ethan said warmly, extending his hand. "My name is Ethan." The veteran looked surprised. After a brief pause, he shook his hand. "James Carter," he replied. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of a lifetime. For the first time since boarding the plane, someone had treated him like he truly mattered. Neither of them realized it yet, but this simple handshake was the beginning of a story that would inspire millions around the world. As the aircraft climbed above the clouds, the silence between Ethan and James slowly faded. A flight attendant arrived with refreshments. She smiled politely at Ethan. "What would you like for lunch, sir?" Before Ethan could answer, she turned to James. "And for you, sir?" James hesitated. He quietly reached into his pocket and counted a few worn dollar bills. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I can only afford a bottle of water." The flight attendant gently explained that meals in first class were already included. James looked surprised. "Wes, it's been a long time since anyone offered me something without expecting anything in return." Ethan noticed the emotion in the old man's eyes. Without making a scene, he smiled and said, "Then today, let's enjoy a good meal together." For the next hour, they talked like two old friends, about life, about dreams, about the choices that define a person. Ethan never mentioned that he was one of the richest men in the world, and James never asked. To him, the young man beside him wasn't a billionaire. He was simply someone who had chosen kindness over judgment. Neither of them realized that before this flight was over, the entire world would know their names. As their conversation continued, Ethan noticed something unusual. James never spoke about himself with regret. Instead, he spoke with gratitude. He shared stories of serving his country as a young soldier, of rescuing fellow service members under impossible conditions, of returning home with nothing but memories and a few medals packed away in an old box. "I don't miss the money," James said with a gentle smile. "I only miss the people I couldn't bring home." His words lingered in the air. For the first time in years, Ethan found himself listening more than speaking. Every sentence carried a lesson no business school had ever taught him. Then, just as James reached into his worn duffel bag to show Ethan an old, faded photograph, the captain's voice suddenly came over the aircraft speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention for a special announcement?" The entire cabin fell silent. No one knew that the next few moments would change the course of both their lives forever. The captain's voice echoed through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue our flight, I'd like to recognize someone very special who is on board today." Every passenger looked around in confusion. The captain continued. "Many years ago, during a dangerous military rescue mission, a young sergeant risked his own life to save mine." A hush fell over the aircraft. "I wouldn't be here today flying this plane if it weren't for that brave man." The captain paused. Then he spoke the name. "Sergeant James Carter." James froze, and slowly every head turned toward the elderly veteran seated beside Ethan. The same passengers who had judged him just minutes earlier now stared in disbelief. Some lowered their eyes in embarrassment. Others began to clap. Within seconds, the entire cabin rose to its feet in a heartfelt standing ovation. James sat speechless, tears filling his eyes. Ethan looked at the humble old veteran beside him and realized he wasn't sitting next to an ordinary man. He was sitting beside a forgotten hero. The applause slowly faded, but the silence that followed spoke even louder. Passengers who had avoided James only minutes before now stepped forward one by one. Some thanked him for his service, others apologized for judging him by his appearance. James simply smiled. You don't owe me an apology, he said gently. We all have stories people can't see. His words touched every heart in the cabin. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the man sitting beside him. How could someone who had risked everything for others end up with so little? As the plane continued its journey through the clouds, Ethan quietly asked, "James, what happened after you came home?" The veteran looked out the window. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a deep breath, he began to tell the story that he had kept hidden for decades, a story that would change Ethan's life forever. James took a slow breath. His eyes remained fixed on the clouds outside the window. "When I came home, I thought the hardest part of my life was over, but I was wrong." He explained that after leaving the military, he had started a small construction company with a few fellow veterans. For years, the business flourished. They built schools, hospitals, and homes for families in need. Then one trusted business partner betrayed them. The company was stolen through fraud. Everything James had worked for, his savings, his home, even his retirement, vanished almost overnight. Despite losing it all, James refused to let bitterness take over. "I've lost money," he said quietly, "but I never lost my character." Ethan sat in silence. No financial report, no board meeting had ever taught him a lesson as powerful as those words. At that very moment, he made a decision. When this plane landed, he would uncover the full truth behind James Carter's story. When the plane finally touched down, most passengers hurried to collect their bags and leave. But Ethan stayed behind. He watched as James quietly lifted his old duffel bag onto his shoulder. There was no one waiting for him, no family, no friends, no celebration, just another lonely walk through another airport. As James turned to leave, Ethan called out, "James, would you have dinner with me tonight?" The veteran smiled politely. "I appreciate the offer, son, but I don't want to be a burden." Ethan shook his head. "You've spent your life carrying other people's burdens. Tonight, let someone carry yours." For a moment, James said nothing. Then, with a grateful smile, he nodded. Neither of them realized that this simple dinner invitation was about to uncover a secret buried for more than 30 years. And once that secret came to light, both of their lives would change forever. That evening, Ethan and James sat together in a quiet restaurant overlooking the city. There were no cameras, no reporters, no bodyguards interrupting the moment, just two men sharing a simple meal. As they talked, Ethan asked the question that had been on his mind all day. "James, if you lost everything, why didn't you ask for help?" James smiled softly. "Because there were always people who needed it more than I did." He explained that after losing his business, he spent years helping struggling veterans find shelter, jobs, and hope. Whatever little money he earned, he shared it. "If kindness only exists when life is easy," James said, "then it isn't kindness at all." Those words struck Ethan harder than any business lesson ever had. For the first time in his life, the billionaire realized that true wealth isn't measured by the size of a bank account, but by the number of lives you choose to lift. At that very moment, Ethan quietly sent a message to his private investigation team. Find out everything about James Carter. He had no idea. The truth they were about to uncover would be far more shocking than anyone could have imagined. The next morning, Ethan's phone rang before sunrise. It was the head of his investigation team. His voice was unusually serious. "Sir, we finished the background check. There are things you need to see immediately." Minutes later, Ethan arrived at his office. One file after another appeared on the large conference screen: old military records, newspaper articles, court documents, photographs that hadn't been seen in decades. Then came the biggest surprise of all. James Carter had never lost his company because of bad business. He had been deliberately betrayed by the very people he trusted most. They forged documents, stole his ownership, and left him with nothing. Yet James never fought for revenge. He simply walked away, choosing peace over bitterness. Ethan sat in complete silence. He looked at James's faded military photo lying on the table. Then he made a promise to himself. No one who sacrificed this much should ever be forgotten. What Ethan decided to do next would soon make headlines around the world. Later that afternoon, Ethan drove to the small veterans shelter where James had been living, and the building was old, the walls were worn, but inside, hope still lived. James wasn't resting. He was serving lunch to other veterans before taking a plate for himself. He laughed with them, listened to their stories, and quietly encouraged anyone who had lost hope. Watching from a distance, Ethan realized something extraordinary. Even after losing everything, James had never stopped giving. Money had left him, but compassion never did. At that moment, Ethan stepped forward. "James," he said with a smile, "I think it's time the world learned who you really are." James looked confused. "What do you mean?" Ethan smiled. "I've been searching for the truth, and I believe it's finally time to make things right." James had no idea that the next chapter of his life was about to become a miracle no one saw coming. A week later, news cameras from across the country gathered outside one of the largest convention centers in the city. No one knew why the world's youngest billionaire had called such an important press conference. Inside the packed auditorium, business leaders, military veterans, journalists, and hundreds of guests waited in anticipation. When Ethan stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. He looked across the audience and then smiled toward the front row. There sat James Carter, still wearing his old military jacket, still unaware of what was about to happen. Ethan took a deep breath. "For years," he began, "we've celebrated people for how much wealth they create. But today, we're here to honor a man for how much hope he gave away." The giant screen behind him lit up with photographs from James's life. His military service, the company he built, the people he helped, the sacrifices he made. Tears filled the room, and then Ethan announced something that no one saw coming, a decision that would change the lives of thousands of veterans forever. The audience held its breath. Ethan looked directly at James before making the announcement. "Effective today, my company is donating $1 billion to establish the James Carter Veterans Foundation." A wave of astonishment swept across the room. People rose to their feet. Some applauded, others wiped away tears. The foundation would provide homes for homeless veterans, medical care for those in need, scholarships for military families, and job opportunities for those struggling to rebuild their lives, right? James sat frozen. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "This can't be for me," he whispered. Ethan stepped down from the stage and walked toward him. "It isn't just for you," he said warmly. "It's because of people like you. You spent your life lifting others. Now it's our turn to lift you." For the first time in many years, James couldn't hold back his tears. The room erupted into another standing ovation, but Ethan had one final surprise, one that would restore something James thought he had lost forever. As the applause slowly faded, Ethan turned toward the giant screen behind him one last time. "I have one more announcement," he said. The room fell completely silent. A historic photograph appeared on the screen. It showed James standing proudly in front of the construction company he had built decades earlier. Ethan smiled. "After months of legal investigations, we've recovered the evidence proving that James Carter's company was stolen through fraud." Gas echoed throughout the auditorium. "The courts have officially ruled in his favor. Every stolen asset, every remaining property, and every legal right would be returned to James." And the audience erupted with joy. James covered his face with trembling hands. "I never wanted revenge," he whispered. "I only wanted the truth." Ethan gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "And today the truth has finally found its way home. For the first time in over 30 years, justice had finally been served. But the greatest reward wasn't the company, right? It was knowing that an honest man's name had finally been restored." Months passed. The James Carter Veterans Foundation began transforming lives across the country. Families who had spent years without a home finally received the keys to a place they could call their own. Veterans received life-saving medical care. Young men and women from military families earned scholarships to pursue their dreams. Thousands found new careers through training and employment programs. Hope was no longer just a promise. It had become a reality. James continued to live simply. He never asked for luxury. He never chased fame. Instead, he spent his days visiting veterans, encouraging young people, and reminding everyone that kindness is the greatest investment anyone can make. One afternoon, Ethan asked him, "After everything you've been through, what's the greatest lesson you've learned?" James smiled. "The richest person in the world isn't the one who keeps the most, it's the one who gives the most." Those words spread across the world, inspiring millions to see success in an entirely new way. 1 year later, the James Carter Veterans Foundation had become a symbol of hope. More than 50,000 veterans had received support. Families were reunited, children returned to school, countless lives were rebuilt. Yet every time reporters asked James how he wanted to be remembered, his answer never changed. I don't want people to remember my name. I want them to remember that one act of kindness can change someone's entire life. Ethan stood beside him and smiled. That simple flight and that unexpected seat assignment had become the beginning of a movement that no one could have imagined. A journey that started with compassion and ended with a legacy of hope. Because sometimes the greatest opportunities in life don't come from business deals or billion-dollar investments. They begin with something much simpler, a kind heart, and the courage to treat every person with dignity years later. Like, people no longer remembered the flight number, they didn't remember the date, but they never forgot the story. Schools began sharing James Carter's journey with their students. Business leaders quoted his wisdom in boardrooms. Young entrepreneurs discovered that true success isn't measured only by profit, but by purpose. One simple act of kindness had inspired a generation. As for Ethan, he often smiled whenever he boarded a commercial flight, because every empty seat reminded him of the day his life changed forever. The day he stopped seeing people for what they looked like and started seeing them for who they truly were. James never asked to become a hero. He simply chose kindness even when life had given him every reason not to. And in the end, that kindness became his greatest legacy. On the anniversary of that unforgettable flight, thousands gathered for the dedication of the James Carter Memorial Center. Veterans, families, students, and business leaders stood side by side, not because they were wealthy, not because they were famous, but because one man's compassion had brought them together. James slowly walked onto the stage. His hair had turned whiter, his steps were slower, but his smile was as warm as ever. He looked at the crowd and spoke just a few words. If you have the chance to help someone, don't wait. You may never realize how one small act of kindness can change a person's life. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Ethan watched from the front row with tears in his eyes. He knew the world hadn't just gained a hero, it had gained a reminder that kindness is the greatest legacy anyone can leave behind, and that legacy would live on for generations to come. Years passed, but the world continued to change, right? Businesses rose and fell, fortunes were made and lost. But one story refused to fade. At the entrance of the James Carter Memorial Center stood a simple bronze statue. It didn't celebrate wealth, it didn't celebrate power, it celebrated kindness. Every day, veterans, students, and families stopped to read the words engraved beneath it. The greatest investment you will ever make is in another human being. Visitors came from around the world to learn about the man who had changed millions of lives without ever seeking recognition. Ethan often visited the memorial in silence. He would smile, remembering the ordinary flight that became the most extraordinary day of his life. One empty seat, one simple conversation, one act of respect. That was all it took to change the future. As the sun set behind the memorial, children played nearby while veterans shared stories of hope. James looked around with grateful eyes and whispered, This was never about me. It was always about reminding people that kindness still has the power to change the world. And in that peaceful moment, everyone understood that some legacies are not built with money. They are built with compassion, courage, and the choice to see the humanity in every person. As this story comes to an end, take a moment to ask yourself one simple question. How many lives could change because of one act of kindness from you? You don't have to be a billionaire. You don't have to be famous. You don't need power or influence. Sometimes a smile, a helping hand, or a few words of encouragement can become the turning point in someone else's life. James Carter's greatest achievement wasn't the company he built or the fortune that was returned to him. It was the lives he touched when no one was watching, right? And that's a legacy anyone can choose to leave behind, right? If this story inspired you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who could use a little hope today. Together, we can spread more stories that remind the world that kindness still matters. Thank you for watching. And remember, the greatest investment you will ever make is in another human being. We'll see you in the next story.